screen.
All right. And he's not in the attendees. Okay. I'm calling to order our special meeting workshop of Tuesday, January 18th. Can we get a roll call?
Student trustee Dana.
Here.
Student trustee Lyra.
Here.
Trustee Boyd.
Here.
Trustee Davidson.
Here.
Trustee Doss is absent tonight. Vice President Duran.
Here.
President Hinckley.
Here.
And Superintendent Wells will be joining us as soon as he can.
Great, thank you. And can we get the mission and vision statement and meeting norms read, please?
The mission of Albany Unified School District is to provide excellent public education that empowers all to achieve their fullest potential as productive citizens. AUSD is committed to creating comprehensive learning opportunities in a safe, supportive, and collaborative environment, addressing the individual needs of each student.
Our meeting norms are as follows. 1, maintain a focus on what is best for our students. 2, ensure a safe environment for all views to be expressed, treating each other, staff, and the public respectfully. 3, endeavor to find common solutions to issues through collaboration without sacrificing one's beliefs and what is best for students. And 4, make a commitment to effective deliberation, each one listening with an open mind while others are allowed to express their own points of view, even if one disagrees.
Great, thank you. Sorry, these special workshops have a different agenda and I'm skipping around. Okay, our next item is to approve our agenda tonight, which Mission has helpfully posted up here. So we have 2 review and action items and then a short break and a review and discussion item. And I know we had planned to finish at 8:30. We've started late. So I think we can still finish at 8:30. We added quite a bit of time at the end. So if I could get a motion to approve this agenda.
My apologies.
Dr. Wells, I will continue. I move that we approve tonight's agenda.
I second.
Oh, boy.
Sorry, student trustee Dana.
Yes.
Student trustee Lyra.
Yes.
Trustee Davidson, you're first tonight.
Yes.
Vice President Duran.
Yes.
President Hinckley.
Yes.
And Trustee Boyd.
Yes.
Thank you.
Great. The agenda is approved unanimously. So we'll move to the first review and action item, which is to approve the Board of Education statement on equity. And then we can also discuss next steps. So a little bit of background on how we got to this point, particularly for our 2 student board members who joined us after we did the series of workshops with Nicole Anderson. So we did 4 workshops with Nicole Anderson of Anderson Consulting, who was hired by the district to do these workshops with the board and who has also been doing some professional development for our staff. And so we did 4 workshops, and one of the focus goals of those workshops was to develop a board equity statement, which would be a statement that reflects what we mean by equity, some of our description of it, that could be incorporated into a board equity policy, which we'll be discussing a little bit later, put on our website, included in other materials, and would essentially be a reference point for the board to use when we're making decisions. And so I believe we spent 3 meetings beginning to work on this statement, including some work that was done behind the scenes by Nicole. And the latest version of that statement she created for us on May 10th in preparation for the meeting that we had on the 27th. And then on the 27th, we discussed the statement and how people felt about it, but we didn't actually make any revisions. And so the version of the statement we're going to begin talking about tonight is as of May 10th. There was one change that Trustee Boyd proposed during that meeting that was just a grammatical issue that we didn't fix during that meeting, but I made a note of it in the document that Julie's going to show us. So because there was some miswording in the beginning part. So, you know, this is our discussion, and I realize that our two student board members have kind of inherited a process that started before them. So I certainly want to make sure that student board members have adequate chance to ask questions about the process and weigh in, since you all didn't have an opportunity to have that back and forth over the other series of meetings. We can also discuss as a board, in addition to refining this statement, and Julie has this open as a Google Doc so that she can reflect changes that we talk about. But the other thing we can discuss is whether the statement we approve tonight reflects our agreement as a board, but we might still want to take other steps to, for example, to have community input on a statement, to have it sent out to different groups and get feedback from them. So we don't have to necessarily have this be the final statement. So that can also be part of our discussion is, what does this represent once we all agree on something tonight? What's sort of the next step? And I should also say, excuse me, as part of the background that Trustee Lyra, Trustee Boyd, Superintendent Wells, and myself agreed to sort of sit down and figure out what our next steps on this equity work were going to be. And decided that rather than continue to have workshops with Nicole Anderson, that we would try to have this process tonight among ourselves, particularly so that we could really orient the discussion around what we want to do rather than continue to spend hours of workshops talking about statements and policies. So I think our idea after we met was that we really want the bulk of the discussion to be around what are the areas of equity we actually want to work on, what can we do in 2022, what can we work on, what kind of data can we look at, what are the ways we're going to implement this, rather than get too overly bogged down in developing policies or statements that might just sit on our website and not mean anything if we don't actually have the time to talk about the work. So I welcome comments too by Trustee Boyd and Superintendent Wells, who are part of that discussion, or student board member Lyra, about what you're hoping to get out of this meeting as well. But that's the context that got us to this agenda item.
I'll just chime in to second everything that President Hinckley just said and say that I am excited at the opportunity to get the statement and the policy, set as something that we are comfortable with, that we can get behind, that we think is, a good reflection of where our values are, but then set about doing the actual work as she referenced.
So maybe we can start by letting our two student board members, so the statement starts under the yellow, so it's the sentence and then our equity includes and then the 4 bullets. So if I want to give them a chance first to give some response about what you think of this statement. How does this reflect your definition of equity, your sense of what kind of a statement we need to be able to make in order to guide the board's work? And I don't know if I can see everybody's hands. I think so. Or you can mull it over for a bit if you want other board members to jump in first.
I'm
Yeah.
reading.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, Vice President Duran.
Okay, I'll just jump in, right? Because we're really looking at this and seeing if we want to make changes. Overall, I think our equity work and what it includes here is really good. There was a couple of areas I would, want to make comments on, but the one thing I noticed that we're missing is an actual definition of equity. And I honestly think that's the hardest thing to do, right? Is to come up with what is equity? And I think we all know from community meetings we've had or our board meetings, lots of people have different ideas of what equity means. So I think it's really crucial that we zero in on this. And I had seen from another comment from another group, I think it was Oakland, where they ended up concluding after some meetings that, just like you had said, President Hinckley, that parent being involved, engaged in this is important. And they also said coming up with a definition of what equity means is important. So given that, I said, okay, well, I'll just throw my 2 cents in just to start in terms of what it might be. And we may not, it may not go anywhere and people are happy with what this is. But I just said, anyway, my statement or what I put together is equity is the recognition that the playing field, and of course, this is jargon that lots of us have used in the past, so it might not be so current today, but it's the recognition that the playing field is not always equal for all our students, in particularly for historically marginalized groups, as it says here. So that was kind of my thinking about what a definition of equity is. So it's a recognition, but it's then also, the second part is, what do you do after you recognize it, right? And that's where it's providing the opportunities, access to opportunities and resources based on the needs in order. Now, and this was the second part, and then I'll be quiet. I have different ones, but I'll just throw out this. In order to reach their full potential, that's another term we use all the time. And really, what does that mean? It is so general. I think full potential for one student might not be the same for the other student. So in education, what is it we really are looking to achieve? And so I just put down where, once again, I think I got it from another group in terms of all the things you sent out, was in order to reach, and instead of in order to reach, it would be in order to participate fully in the educational process. So it's defining it as based on their needs of students, so that what can they do? So that they can participate fully in the educational process, educational experience, something like that. Okay, that's it for now.
Are you able to see Julie typing?
Yeah.
And then I think we would cross out the last part. Could you also read again, Vice President Duran, the part that maybe it would be maybe we could, for now, we can put it as a second sentence in this paragraph, the first thing you read.
Okay, equity is the recognition that the playing field is not always equal for all our students, dash, in particularly for historically marginalized groups. But that's kind of almost an incomplete sentence, because, okay, so if that's a different, so what are we going to do about it? Once we recognize, then it follows that that part about that the district is committed to ensuring that each student have access, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay, why don't we leave these up here as suggestions and then get more feedback?
Did I get that right?
It looks pretty good.
Except it should say equal 4.
Let's see.
Yeah.
And I would say instead of our marginalized students, I would say in particular, historically marginalized students.
Yeah.
Mine is also like just like a wording thing. Instead of, I mean, we would be saying students twice. I'd prefer maybe to say like in particular, for those who come from historically marginalized communities.
And the only reason, you know, that I was thinking more of students is because we're talking about the educational system, right? So I wanted to focus on the educational system and not the broader.
Right. I think they're just
Society.
saying the wording, having students twice in the same sentences.
I get that, yeah,
So
in particular.
no, that would,
Uh,
yeah, leave that one. And
all
then
of the
in
students.
particular wait, how did you word that? For those
Well,
Who-
historically
who are
marginalized, that's
members
an-
of
yeah, that's a good way
historically
of,
marginalized, yeah, for those who are historically marginalized.
I was also going to ask, is this equity policy just referring to the way in which we treat our students, or is it also like an approach to like staff and like teachers and administrators as well? Like I feel
think-
like there's a need for that whole thing as well, not just like a focus on the student body.
I think that's a question to consider.
Trustee Duran, thank you for coming up with a sentence and phrase for us to start this off. I want to go deeper, and if I'm jumping the gun, let me know. Help me out here, Trustee Duran. As we look at the first, I really appreciate equity is the recognition that the playing field is not always equal. And I'm thinking we should have a word that's different from equal, because equal is not fair, nor is it just. And so fair or just might want to replace equal. For example, I remember working with some students here in Alameda County at Juvenile Hall. And as these middle schoolers were coming in, they were all being treated equal. They all had a little narrow comb that they were given, the same thing. And one of the kids was saying, why are you giving me this comb? I can't use it. And that's when they introduced the different kind of comb for the African Americans to comb their hair, opposed to the thin combs that they couldn't use. So although they were equal, it was not fair, nor was it just. They didn't get what they need. So I'm wondering, should we play with that word equal at some point? Any thoughts?
I certainly hear what you're saying. My only concern with fair and just is that is so general. And you go down a different kind of hole, I think, when we go to that term as those as well, right? Fair and just. Because what's fair for one student may not be fair for another student. So I'm just throwing that out. I mean, I think it's hard. It's hard to come up with the terms that really speaks to it and is inclusive, right? So I'll just say that.
Yeah, and I don't want us to go down a rabbit hole, but I get the gist, and I like the gist.
Other comments? Yeah, Vice President Duran.
I don't want to monopolize this, so anybody just kick me off, whatever. But I'll just, in terms of our equity work includes the very first one, intentionally and continuously dismantling structures and systems. I mean, I think we all get that. I think we've all read a lot about that, but I wanted to be really more precise. Is that exactly what we're going to do? Dismantle structures and systems. I mean, that's fine with me, but I don't think we're doing that. And I think we're far away from being able to do that. I think I've tried a little bit and it hasn't worked. And for example, I was thinking, okay, what structure would we be talking about, or a system? And I know that President Hinckley shared with me last year, maybe, a book about a grading policy and the inequities that are there. And I know when somebody had raised it at one of our meetings, I think Superintendent Wells didn't want to go there because, I mean, it opens up a whole can of worms around teachers and teacher rights, et cetera. But to me, that's exactly what we're talking about when we talk about dismantling structures and systems, right? So I want us to be really practical at the same time, because words are just words until we put them into practice. So if anybody else has any thoughts about that and what that means to them, and if you really feel that we are going to do this, dismantle, that is.
And if I remember, I think we went around this item last time quite a bit with the same the same perception. I mean, many people would argue that our K-12 education system harms historically marginalized student groups. So there's a system right there that are we really trying to dismantle the entire process? I think we played around with different language last time, including identifying and interrupting structures, or just at least identifying them. I think this is also a question of, and maybe this speaks to the need to get additional community feedback, especially once we kind of identify what we really intend to work on, to see how well this matches up and is understandable to people as a statement of what the board intends to do. Because the statement will be not as effective if people read it and think, I have no idea what that means. I don't know from reading this what the board intends to do. Anyway, I think that was sort of the gist of the discussion last time. Yeah, go ahead, Trustee Dana.
I don't know if this is relevant, given what you just said, but in response to Trustee Duron's question that she posed, something that I can think of like off the top of my head is like late work policies, and like sort of, I mean, if you're working a job straight after school, sometimes it's hard to like get all of your work in, and then that can like create a whole, I guess, I wanted to say like somersault in terms of like missing or late assignments, and I think that the fact that those aren't kind of all unanimous kind of makes it almost inequitable, depending on classes and depending on teachers. So that's like something that I might want to, or that we might want to explore a little bit, just as a quick example in terms of like grading, because that's what I see happening right now because of the pandemic.
Yeah, Trustee Boyd.
I like identifying and then maybe working toward dismantling or something like that. That suggests, I don't want to make it like mean nothing, but at least I think identifying is important, like the issue that Trustee Dana just brought up. Like that's a very worthwhile conversation to be having that wouldn't like occur to everyone automatically. I don't think it's not something that I had spent a lot of time thinking about. So I think identifying is still like a worthwhile thing. And then, working toward dismantling indicates what our intentions are without saying we're going to break it all apart, like, in the next couple months.
So identifying and working toward dismantling, and then delete the other three. Okay.
Can I add something here? Just food for some thought here. Picking up where Trustee Boyd left off, identifying and working towards adjusting structures opposed to dismantling.
Is there a word somewhere in between adjusting and dismantling? Because adjusting sounds like we're not really going to do a lot, and dismantling sounds like we're going to burn it down. So I don't know what's the average.
Modifying is way too weak a word.
How about improving?
That's what I was just thinking, improving, but I don't know if that's too weak too. We got to start somewhere, Vice President Duran.
Well, if we can come and revisit this, then I'm willing.
Improving is so positive. I kind of like it because dismantling feels really negative to me. Like we know it's so wrong and we're so intense, even though it's what we want to do is take these apart. But improving means we want to do better.
Yeah, I guess the question is, what does it mean to improve a system that harms people? Like, if a system harms people, then what does it mean to say you're improving it? I like the word improving. I just, that all the words together, I'm not sure exactly what it.
One word that's come up often too popular today is disrupting, right? I don't think we have that there. I mean, disrupting means you're stopping something, right? And then once you really focus on that and go, we are disrupting this process or this, system that we have in place. Now we're going to look to improve it, but we kind of have to have a point of stopping it first. Because otherwise it's little improvements. It's adding a little here, a little window dressing, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And I think if we're going to really approach this seriously, we have to go beyond window dressing.
How about reforming? Is that stronger?
I was thinking shifting. Is that maybe not strong enough?
I like reforming.
I think we become limited because we tie to the second part of the sentence, harm this historically marginalized student groups.
Right. Well, that is the focus.
Yeah, to improve the outcomes of historically marginalized students.
What if we use the word challenge? Not the challenge changes anything. It's just a calling out, a shouting out of what's wrong, but it's still not changing anything.
I mean, to me, something like reforming means we're going to do something about it. We're supposed to be making policy, not just challenging it. So if we're not going to fix it,
I agree.
Who's going to?
I'm okay with reforming for now.
Just looking at a time check, I want to make sure we get through the other bullets and then talk about how we want to proceed. Yes, go ahead.
Hinckley, if I could just say that I'm also not happy with the ending through restorative policies and practices. I understand the restorative policies and practices when you talk about disciplinary issues and confrontations where you're trying to get kids together. But I don't know when we're talking about dismantling or re-looking at structure, seriously looking at systems and trying to see how we're going to change them. Are we doing it through restorative policies and practices? I don't get that part.
I mean, this was a bit compiled by things board members sent to Nicole individually. So, we should decide what we think about that phrasing, but I don't know exactly what was meant by it.
I mean, maybe it can just be an addition, and creating restorative policies and practices, because it doesn't seem like a way of reforming or dismantling. It seems more so like an addition. but that does leave the first sort of sentence open-ended, if we're comfortable with that, or we can come up with another way of ending that sentence. Oh, I was saying like
I think,
instead of
like,
by
and creating.
and creating, yeah.
What about the second bullet? This is one where I think there were two. So Julie and I had a little bit of trouble with reconciling some different versions that were floating out there. And at one point, this word students had been replaced by stakeholders. And I don't know if that speaks a little bit to what Trustee Lyra asked a minute ago about, is this also for staff?
The only thing about that is like stakeholders doesn't sound like a student friendly word, or it doesn't, it just doesn't seem open to
Sounds like it just means parents.
Yeah.
Is there another community member? I don't know, but
I think
school community members or something?
Like school community members, site community members. I was gonna also say that instead of creating, you could say fostering or nurturing.
Mm-hmm.
We have fostering, or we have fosters later in the sentence, so maybe nurturing for the first.
Oh, right. And then at the end, something like of everyone in the school community, or I don't know how I don't want to be responsible for the whole city of Albany. Innovation of all members of the district community.
Well, we say community above in that sentence, so could we not just list out students, staff,
everyone in
and
the district? Oh, yeah. Students, staff, students and staff?
or students, staff, and other key stakeholders, if we want to then put that word in at the end, or just other stakeholders.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, Vice President, sorry. Yeah, you guys can jump in. I just saw her hand up.
I wanted to question the two sort of skills or things we think are important: creativity and innovation. I started thinking about, well, what about curiosity? That is a super important one. What about resilience? What about empathy? What about love of learning? There's so many. I didn't understand quite why we settled on two. I mean, they're great, but they're not the only ones.
I feel really similarly. That was what I was going to bring up as well. And I think you have like a great list already. I was going to also I like to include wellness in that as well. Because I think, yeah, mental health, taking care of yourself is something that we need to instill in everyone.
Is that your whole list, Clementina?
Yeah. So we have curiosity, innovation. I mean, creativity, innovation, curiosity, resilience, empathy, love of learning, so that they'll.
And creativity and innovation are a little bit the same thing. I guess it depends how you define them, but we could fit more things in there.
Do you want them in any particular order?
I think like you have them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. That's okay.
What about bullet number 3, redefining student success by cultivating relevant connections to their unique gifts, talents, and interests. Interests, I think, should be plural if we keep it. Yeah, Vice President Duran.
You know what, I just didn't want to let it go there, is as well as academic success. I mean, you know, that is really the bottom line to education is academic success. And, you know, their academic success will come through these connections, right? Once you focus on kids' interests, et cetera, et cetera. But I just don't want to let go of the concept of, you know, oh, well, wait a minute. Yeah, we're redefining student success. That's pretty heavy duty, I think, by cultivating their gifts, talents, interests, as well as their academic, I guess not success, redefine success by, as well as their academic
Achievement?
achievements. Hmm,
Prowess, ability.
What if,
there you go.
yeah,
Uh-huh.
what if, I mean, I think I sort of remember why this said redefining, but what if we just say supporting student success in all these different ways? So that this item makes us responsible for supporting all these different dimensions, including the traditional academic success.
Sounds
I had one to play with: supporting student success by cultivating relevant connections to their unique gifts, talents, and interests through the development of multiple pathways. Because it just circles back to exclusively academics when we're talking about student success by cultivating relevant connections to their unique gifts, talents, and interests. And then we jump back to multiple. Yeah, okay.
What do you think of pathways as meaning in this context?
I'll just say through multiple pathways.
Right, but what?
Well, I'm thinking when you're thinking about, it starts off supporting student success by cultivating relevant connections to their unique gifts, talents, and interests. Students may be interested in the arts and not so much the core academics. And so we may have an art pathway that now defines if they completed success opposed to being a 4.5 student. It allows students to think about their current pursuit, maybe something different from just pure academics. I don't know if I'm doing a good job with defining.
No, you're doing a great job defining it. The reason I was asking is because there are a lot of different ways this item could be interpreted. And I think one is that some of the students who are struggling to succeed academically, it's because they're not having their sort of interests tapped. So it's not that we want to just say, okay, you're not academically successful, we're going to redirect you to some other pathway. It's that we want to make ourselves responsible for creating a curriculum and so forth, an approach that engages all students in academics by tapping into what they are interested in. And the reason I ask about pathways is because I know, within our world, that can have a very narrow meaning of like, you're not very good at school, so we're going to put you in the whatever pathway. And I want to make sure that that's not what this bullet ends up doing, because I don't think that wouldn't reflect what I'm hoping to reflect here, which is that a lot of times when students aren't succeeding academically, it's because we're not doing a good job of saying, yes, you can succeed at math. Here's a better way for me to engage your interest in it. I don't know if I'm making any sense, but.
No, I get that, because pathways have positive and negative connotation. And that depending on how you interpret it, So I'm wondering, should it be a definition with it to make it clearer? That it supporting student success by cultivating relevant connections to their unique gifts, talents, and interests, as well as their academic achievements.
Any other thoughts on this bullet?
I have a quick question. Was there another word besides achievements that was thrown out? I think I missed it.
Yeah, actually there were some that I think I might have talked through. Trustee Dana, I think said some.
Yeah, I said like prowess and ability. I think Trustee Lyra might have had one.
Oh, I said achievements. I think prowess is better.
Oh, okay.
We want to leave it with prowess. Okay.
Yep.
Sorry, I mean to do that. Okay, thank you.
And do we want to leave the pathways in there?
Maybe like through multiple approaches or something like that.
I like that
Yeah, I
so
like
much
that.
better.
Yeah, it's the same idea, but it doesn't have the possible narrowing. Okay, last bullet. Examining biases, interrupting inequitable practices, and holding ourselves and the system, which we will have dismantled, accountable for closing equity gaps for students. One other wording issue that came up last time was the idea of using opportunity gap versus equity gap.
Thank you. I was just thinking that. Thank you, because thank you for that.
So I don't know if this is an example of where we would want to say opportunity gap instead.
It is.
Yeah, Trustee Boyd.
I also just wasn't sure what we mean by the system. Like, do we mean like the man, like, or like the district, or I'm not sure what we're talking about.
And yeah, I'd be fine with just holding ourselves accountable, since ultimately that's who we can actually hold accountable.
Do you mean the Board of Education?
Yeah,
Could we add the superintendent as well?
I mean,
Or you
that's
think?
part of our, yeah, accountability structure.
Mhm. Could we also, besides examine biases, could we, our vision is to erase them? Examine and erase biases?
I guess how would we erase?
Kick them out. Let's see. And we examine them, and then well, what is it that we do want to do with biases? We want to eliminate them.
You want to at least address them? Because I think through our best efforts of addressing them, you can reduce them, but eliminating them, I don't know how realistic that is.
Could we then just eliminate examine and just go addressing biases? Because to me, that's much more proactive than just examining. So in addressing biases, you are examining them obviously first before you can do something about them.
I'm a little confused about this bullet because I like the accountability piece, and I think I remember arguing that I liked this piece last time because it puts us, it makes clear that we need to evaluate ourselves based on how well we address the opportunity gap. But the beginning part of this sentence, I'm not really understanding like whose practices we're talking about and whose biases or how it ties back into accountability. So I don't know how those two things relate, or if it's about our own biases, that's part of what this is speaking to.
I think it's too broad because we all have our own biases. And we did talk about addressing inequitable practices and holding ourselves accountable for closing opportunity gaps for students.
How do people feel those first two things relate to the first bullet? Like, what do they say that might be different? Yeah, Trustee Boyd.
Shoot, I raised my hand and then you asked a new question, so
It's okay, go ahead, just, yeah.
I was just going to say, for me, the addressing biases and interrupting inequitable practices, it does relate to being held accountable, and not to point a finger or anything, but if you're imagining a situation where you have a teacher or someone who's in charge of, you know, giving out grades, et cetera, who has biases or inequitable practices, that person would need to be held accountable for closing opportunity gaps, and those biases would be could be creating, you know, the gaps as far as what students are able to achieve, what they have the opportunity to achieve. So I think that I think it's addressing the biases of like everyone who's in the district, like everyone who has any power, anyone who makes any sort of policy or actually, I can't think of the right word, but who actually like carries out any sort of policies, like anyone who has any control.
That's a cool way to think about this overall statement too, is that ideally we would want every member of the community to sort of internalize this and their own responsibility for implementing it. Okay.
I mean, your question about the, sorry, not to interrupt you, but your question about how it interacts with the first bullet is a good one though, because I'm not exactly sure how they differ entirely, like, or if they are kind of over, you know, kind of on top of each other. Like, I'm not exactly sure what the difference is between what's accomplished in those, maybe. I guess the accountability piece is different.
Vice President Duran.
I just had wanted to emphasize once again, President Hinckley, I know you talked about the board being held accountable. Well, when we talk about and the system, to me, the superintendent is the system. He represents the system, right? So in and of ourselves, the board is not going to be able to do all this dismantling or whatever it is, you know, we're going to be doing here, but the superintendent does the how, right? So I believe he really needs to be a part of that when we're talking about holding ourselves and the superintendent accountable for closing the gaps. That's just my viewpoint.
I have a thought here, but I wait for that. How about considering identify and address inequitable practices and hold ourselves accountable for closing opportunity gaps for all students? Opportunity gap for students. What do we, I say that.
Can you say that again?
Yeah, can you repeat that? Sorry.
I put identify and address inequitable practices. I just try to narrow what our focus is. Identify and address inequitable practices.
I don't know whose hands went up when. I think I'm a little reluctant to lose the word biases in completely, but so between Vice President Duran and Trustee Boyd, I don't know whose hand was up first. You're pointing at each other.
Okay, I'll just, thank you, Vice President Duran. I'll just say, as far as adding in the superintendent, that just feels kind of weird to me. Like if you look at the lead in, it says in the Albany Unified School District, we're committed to equity through ensuring, et cetera. And then when we say our equity work, I was thinking of our as the district, not necessarily the board. So if we're gonna call out the superintendent, I think we should call out the board somehow too, or else just leave it the district, like the people who make decisions for the district are saying we're going to do these things.
I was thinking something similar, but I thought I was being a bit too biased. So it's good to hear a more objective perspective. And then I was thinking superintendent here, not up there, and then the board is not called up here, kind of like a balancing piece.
And I do think this is something that, you know, once we get it in whatever, you know, to a place where it's really incorporated, you know, for example, read at the beginning of committee meetings or something, it is something that I think we want people to be able to say, I am part of that R that is responsible for working on this. Vice President Duran.
I had copied something else down here that instead of identify and address biases, because I agree biases is really important, that to understand and interrupt patterns of institutional bias, right? Because we talked about personal bias, but we're really talking here about institutional bias at all levels of the organization. So identify and interrupt or address, whichever people are more comfortable with, and interrupt patterns of institutional bias at all levels of the organization, of the district.
So you're saying, you know, we have another bullet that starts with identifying. I wonder if we could just have this just say addressing institution, say what you said again,
Yeah.
addressing institutional biases.
Address and interrupt. I mean, because if you feel address is sufficient, but what we want to do is, you know, really stop it, right? So address it, interrupt patterns of institutional bias at all levels of the district.
Too many deletes here, hang on.
Yeah. And then what about the inequitable practices? That stays, or that is incorporated in the first bullet?
Well, we could do biases and inequitable practices. They kind of go hand in hand.
Just rewriting the whole thing. Closing.
So one last question about this bullet, is it worth just making these two different things? Because I worry the accountability piece is now it's sort of buried. And I'm not sure we need both of these together. Or is it not too long?
You know, I think you're onto something here, because that's two complete different thoughts fused into one bullet. addressing and interrupting institutional advice and equitable practices, period. That's clear. Now we're talking about holding ourselves accountable.
So we're at 7:15. So I just want to check in about, you know, how we would wrap this up and then take it to the next step. So one option is we decide this is the statement that we're ready to share out for feedback and discuss, you know, what that kind of feedback process would look like. Another option is we say this is done and we're going to vote that this is the statement going forward. And then I guess the third option would be we want to meet again to talk through it more. So hopefully we can each sort of weigh in on that. I don't know if that's what you have your hand up about.
I actually wanted to throw out one more additional one, and it's fine if people think it's too much or whatever, but I really liked it. It said ensuring that fairness, equity, and inclusion are essential principles of our school system and fully integrated into all our policies, programs, operations, and practice. This came from Cincinnati, of all places. So
Ron, would you mind reading that?
Of course,
again?
ensuring that fairness, equity, and inclusion are essential principles of our school system and fully integrated into all our policies, programs, operations, and practices. Fully integrated into all our policies, programs, operations, and practices. And Sarah, President Hinckley, I'll just throw out my opinion that I think we need to look at this again, but I'd also really would like to throw it out to the community at some, put it out there for the community, the parents and staff certainly to look at it and to have opportunity for input as well before we finalize anything.
What do others think? Yeah, Trustee Boyd.
I think that I like the last bullet that Vice President Duron added in there. And I think if possible I don't know what the correct procedure would be, but if this is something that we would be voting on, like if it's something that could be agendized and then available to the community, people can attend a board meeting, comment if they want to, and then at the end of that, at the end of that discussion, we could vote to approve it. That would make sense to me.
Yeah, Superintendent Wells.
I really like the last bullet as the first bullet. I think it really sets the overall tone of what this equity statements are about.
So my preference would be to get community feedback, but not in a public, we can do it in a public meeting, when it comes back and we discuss it, but I think that our board meetings are very appealing to a very tiny group of people in terms of how they participate. So I'm wondering, in addition to sort of sharing this out to different groups and maybe setting up some meetings with specific groups like our existing committees, those are people who are engaged and could, I think, give some real feedback about, how would this help guide your work as a member of the budget committee or the policy committee or the student advisory committee or something, you know, something along those lines. And maybe instead of just asking, what do you think of this, have sort of a series of a few questions, as well as asking them to sort of, okay, how would you put this statement in your own words? Or what does this statement mean to you in terms of how it would affect your work at the district? So I'm wondering if we could try to do sort of a little bit of an engagement process, even if it takes, you know, the rest of the spring, because this is a really busy time. To me, that would be worth it to get that kind of buy-in. And I think a little easier than just asking people to come to a board meeting and give comments, but it would require some investment of time. And it could be individual board members on those committee meetings, for example, walking people through that exercise for a half hour or something and taking notes or recording it. And I think especially for the students and the staff, you know, we would need to come up with some ways of engaging them that are a little outside our normal back and forth. Superintendent Wells, is your hand up from?
Yeah, I think you know, we need to be clear with this equity statement. Is it a Board of Education equity statement, which I hope it is, because the board sets the tone and direction, and then this will allow the rest of us throughout the district do the howl around these statements, and that's where you would have that inclusive piece. But this is an opportunity, I think, emphatically for the board to set the tone and provide direction. Here's the what, and then the community and all the stakeholders can grapple with the how around this, because the direction is, and the tone is clear because of the Board of Education emphatic statement, equity statement. If you start having everyone weigh in on the board equity statement, it's not much of a board statement anymore. And so I guess it goes back to the basics. Do we want this to be a board equity statement, or do we want it to be something else?
Right. And you know, in our conversations with Nicole, her sort of idea of our next steps was that we would workshop it with the community. I think not to undermine that it's a board statement, but because we're only so many people. And so there may be people out there who read this, for example, and say, well, this leaves me out. Like, it's not reflecting something that is really important to me when I think of equity. And to me, it's important that the board hear that before we adopt something and make it final, because we are only a certain number of people with our own limited experiences. Trustee Boyd.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to get feedback from the community. I wonder if it would be possible. My concern is if it becomes like a wordsmithing exercise, because I feel like an infinite amount of time can be spent choosing every single word. Like, I could have just gone with whatever Vice President Duran decided to write down and said, okay, like, even if I don't agree with every single word, that's pretty much going to do it. Like, so, you know, if the outreach and the discussion with the community could be a discussion of, like, I think I really appreciate President Hinckley, what you just said. Like, if somebody feels like this doesn't include me, like there's a concept here that is missing, like, I feel like that's really, really important. Personally, I feel like that's something I would really want to know and want for us to add. So if it could be more sort of geared toward those types of ideas, and also bringing issues like the issue Trustee Dana brought up earlier about, you know, students who are working and not, you know, having a different sort of task ahead of them if they're trying to get work in by particular deadlines. So if it could be something not just theoretical, but like sort of practical, like, you know, discuss the statement generally, you know, is there anything kind of really wrong with this, or, you know, and then also what are issues that you feel like need to be addressed, like, you know, kind of an equity, like let's have a discussion about the things that we need to be talking about and doing a better job with in the district too. So it's not just theoretical.
Yeah, I think that's really important because the wordsmithing could bog us down for for months. I mean, one thing that occurs to me too is we have that survey type program that I'm completely blanking on the name of, you know, where people like they vote on statements and they vote on each other's. What is it called?
Thought exchange.
Yes, thought exchange. And this could actually be, like, if you ask very specific questions, like, what does this statement leave out for you? Or what types of equity issues, you know, do you think of when you read this statement? Or, you know, a series of focused questions that are, like you said, Trustee Boyd, get at the scope and the intent, not the words. And that would give us a sense of, is this resonating? Are we missing something? And then when we come back together, we can figure out the exact wording, but we would feel more confident that we haven't left out some glaring thing, or we haven't created something that people read and go, I have no idea what this means. So maybe we could use that thought exchange tool, because that did seem like a lot of people participated. It was hard to tell if it was a lot of people participating several times, but it seemed, I don't know if the student board members could speak to whether the students, you did a student specific thing for that once, right? Was that something that students were comfortable engaging with? A tool that seemed useful?
Yeah, I think so. I think we might need to approach, like, I want to say advertising it differently. But I think that it allowed students to sort of communicate their ideas easily. So I think it's a good method in like collecting input, especially because this is something that I feel like students might have a lot to say on.
And it would be less time consuming for staff as well. If maybe our subcommittee could work on a set of 4 or 5 questions and then interpret the feedback. Superintendent Wells.
No, I just wanted to, before we left this section, I wanted to be emphatic about an issue down here, bullet number 6, where it says holding ourselves accountable for closing opportunity gaps for students. I think after the word for, we should have capitalized as an emphasis the word all, capital A, capital L, because that implies we include all of our student population. So thanks.
All right, so I'm not sure I've heard from everybody, but I think we're at a comfortable enough point with this group about this wording that we could share this out in a public way as a draft in a process of getting some initial feedback and then bring it back for approving the final wording. Is there anyone opposed to that process? Okay, so that will be our next step. So we're not adopting this, so we don't need to vote on that. But are you also comfortable with that same subcommittee of myself, Trustee Boyd, Superintendent Wells, and Trustee Lyra? Actually, Trustee Dana, I don't remember if you had also wanted to be on that.
I don't think I am on that.
You're welcome to participate if you want, but we could, so if that group could come up, design the sort of thought exchange piece, implement that, and figure out the timeline for bringing this back to the board. Does that also work for everybody? Okay. Any other comments before we move to the board policy discussion? Okay. So the other piece that Nicole had started working with us on was adopting an equity policy. And she shared with us the draft model policy from the California School Boards Association, as well as a bunch of other sample policies. And one of the other things that our little equity subcommittee discussed was the importance of, again, getting something adopted on paper so that we can move forward and talk about action. And so one of the things we wanted to propose to the board was that we have this model policy sent to our own board policy committee to work on, rather than us as a board trying to sort of wordsmith a very long policy. And have the board policy committee bring it back to us for adoption with the intent of, you know, reviewing it after we have more understanding of how it would relate to implementation. So we can scroll through the sample, I guess, and then discuss, you know, what would our suggestion is to recommend that the board policy committee take up this policy rather than the board trying to, you know, rewrite it. We could provide direction to them. We could decide to go a different route. And if you all want to, you know, share it as part of the agenda, but we can look through it together as well if that's something people are interested in. Trustee Boyd.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's wonderful to have the board policy committee go through it. Just one thing that was kind of glaring when I was looking at the CSBA policy was just, I don't believe there's any reference to students with disabilities or learning differences, or, you know, gender expression, identity, gender expression, gender identity, you know, religious affiliation or LGBTQIA+. So it seemed like the policy really focused on, you know, cultural, linguistic, which I was happy to see, you know, socioeconomic, ethnic, maybe racial, but I thought those were some important considerations that seem like would need to be added in here.
Other feedback? I should also say the other thing, Nicole, in terms of where the statement ties into the policy, she proposed at our last meeting that the equity statement, whatever version of that comes out, would be incorporated into this policy at the beginning. So you'd have both as one document. Were there any other, so if we were to send this to the policy committee with the recommendation that we want them to specifically look at how those groups and students may be left out of this policy, are there other direction? Are there other things people noticed, other direction we'd like to ask the policy committee to focus on? And I do think if we want to send it to them, it would be helpful for us to vote as an action item to assign this to them to put on their work session for the spring. And then we can provide that additional direction.
It would be a worthwhile endeavor for the policy committee to address this policy.
And we can certainly give them too our current draft of the equity statement, just so they also understand where that.
And that committee, just as a reminder, is made up of some key stakeholders as well.
And it's a Brown Act committee, so they meet publicly. The meetings are publicly noticed. People could certainly join and participate in that discussion.
And the board is represented by Veronica and myself, Trustee Davidson and myself.
All right, can we take a motion to send this to them?
I move that we send the sample board policy to the board policy committee.
I second that.
Can't move fast enough. Who seconded that? I'm sorry.
Trustee Lyra.
Trustee
Thank you.
Lyra.
Okay. All right. Student trustee Dana,
Yes.
student trustee Lyra,
Yes.
vice president Duran,
Yes.
president Hinckley,
Yes.
trustee Boyd,
Yes.
trustee Davidson.
Yes.
Great. The motion passes unanimously. So we will send them this draft policy or model policy, our draft equity statement as revised tonight, along with direction to look at the categories of students that are included or excluded from the model policy, in particular students with disabilities, students in special education programs, gender and transgender issues, and LGBTQIA+. Did I leave anything out that you mentioned?
Religious affiliation.
Oh, and religious affiliation. And whatever else, you know, obviously they want to consider. All right, now we had on our agenda to take a short break before we move into the review and discussion. Do folks want to take a 5-minute break? Does anyone want to take a 5-minute break?
I would love a 5-minute break.
Okay, let's do it. So let's come back at 7:45. All right, do we have everyone back? I feel like there was another window in my Zoom screen, but maybe that just got rearranged. All right, so the second part of this meeting is for us to just have an opportunity to discuss the areas that we would like to work on related to equity. So keeping in mind the discussion that we just finished for the last hour about what that means, what are thinking about, you know, maybe the rest of this school year or the rest of this calendar year, what are the areas of work that come to mind for you in terms of, you know, for example, what Trustee Dana brought up around the way that homework is treated? What are some other areas where either areas where the board would like to see data, like to gather data, or like to see some kind of policy or practice change, so that we can help, you know, ultimately our goal is that equity should be shaping our board agendas so that we're prioritizing items that tie to these principles. So this is the first step in sort of putting some teeth to that discussion so that we know what we're talking about. So I'll take notes here. I'm gonna not do it on the screen just so we can still see each other. So I know one that's come up so far is sort of homework and grading approaches. What else would people like to see us dig into? Yeah, Trustee Boyd.
The math department at the high school, I think in particular.
Trustee Lyra.
I definitely want to second the math department, as I feel like its curriculum also doesn't match up with what the middle school like environment is like fostering, with like allowing students to take makeup tests and focusing on mastery. I would also like to add like the addition of implementing a policy that does not take points off for late work, as I feel like during this really stressful time for students, it can be really difficult to turn things in on time with like being in flux with staying at home, quarantining at home, or being in person. I think it'd be really beneficial right now. And there's just also a lot of other benefits to having a late work policy that, yeah, just generally really helpful for students' mental health and like don't impact their grades negatively at all.
Trustee Davidson.
So I want to third that as well. And I think Vice President Duran and I both know in the board policy committee, we have it on our agenda to look at the grading policies in our district this spring. So it would be really great to sort of have this in place first and then have guidance from the board members for what we should be looking at specific areas. So I think the high school is definitely at the forefront. Foreign language and math would be areas that I would put up there. And then just our tracking of students into our honors and AP classes and things like that.
Trustee Lyra, did you have another? Okay. Other topics before we, yeah, Vice President Duran.
Sure, I'll go ahead and throw out three more at least. One is teacher diversity, working on that. The other is, it sort of came out of Student Achievement Committee, which is, you know, we tend to look right away at what's going on in the high school and what are the grades in high school, but we have to catch the kids. If we're really talking about equity and getting kids back on track, we have to start with the youngest ones first, as we see from the assessments and how the kids are going. So I definitely would like to look at the youngest kids, you know, through third grade and see where the kids are at, both in terms of assessments, et cetera, and maybe focus on summer school in particular for those kids. And then what was, oh, and then the other one has to do with the board's goal of goal 3, which was increase outreach to historically disenfranchised communities. That is really key too. And so how are we going to be doing that? That's certainly an equity issue.
Trustee Davidson.
I would also, go to the level of looking at the whole child when we're looking at our equity. And in that, I'm talking about like our learning environment. I know particularly at the elementary level, if we go down to that one, our recess and lunch times, and just sort of the dynamic on the yard and all of that. Of course, everyone knows our physical learning spaces and our outdoor spaces. I think that we can really set a tone. And actually, I was talking to a former principal, a fellow parent the other day, and she said, your hallways, your yards, they set the tone, they set the expectation. And it's really important to have them sort of walk the walk ahead of you. So I would want to look at those elements as well in our district.
So I'll add something that I'm really interested in is the difference in who graduates with meeting different requirements, in particular the UC CSU requirements versus not meeting those, and understanding who's choosing those different pathways and what some of those gaps are. Maybe tied also to the tracking who's taking AP and honors classes, who's graduating with, the sort of baseline Albany graduation requirements versus who's taking additional credits, and what the sort of demographics and other breakdowns are of those numbers. Yeah, Trustee Davidson.
I can let Trustee Dana go first, student board member Dana, because I've had a couple turns.
Oh, no, it's fine. Go ahead.
Okay, I'll just make it really quick. Just off that, President Hinckley, I'd like to look at our other opportunities for other career technical skills and areas that we're supporting our students who maybe aren't as academically rigorously inclined. I don't know how to say that the best way.
Trustee Dana.
Like reading interventions for the lower grade levels, because I know that there's like some sort of benchmark at 3rd grade or something. I don't know, but I remember when I was in elementary school, they would like pull kids out of class to like do reading intervention and stuff, and I just like because I was pulled out of class, but I wasn't necessarily like needing to be pulled out of class, and so just like reviewing like what the criteria is and like all of that would be nice to know.
The issue of math intervention came up in an earlier workshop as well, in terms of, do we have enough of it? And particularly at the elementary level, I think came up in a couple of meetings. Yeah, Trustee Boyd.
I'm not sure the right way to make sure that this is incorporated exactly, but just making sure that we're talking about services provided to students with disabilities. I know we have the audit that's happening, and so presumably we're going to get a decent amount of information from that as far as focus areas. But the extent to which goals are being met and provision of services. Trustee Dana was just talking about students being pulled out of the classroom, how that's happening and whether students are actually being able to be in, I believe it's the least restrictive environment, and being able to participate in classes fully. So just making sure that we never lose sight of that.
Julie, could you do me a favor and put up the equity statement again, just so. Sorry, my dog is eating something. Could you put the statement up again, just so we can look at it one last time as we think about any areas of work?
Are you referring to the one that you guys worked on?
Yeah, the one we just worked on.
Yeah, sure. Give me one moment to pull that up. Closed it.
Great, thank you. So just wanted to give you and everyone an opportunity, including myself, to look at this one last time and think, you know, are there things that this brings to mind in terms of issues you might want to address? Does anyone need more time to look at it? All right, I think you can close it again. All right, so I'm gonna read through this list that we came up with, and then we can see if there's anything else we want to add. And I think, again, keeping in mind, you know, what are some things that, what's a realistic set of things we can work on in the next 6 to 12 months. So we have homework and grading approaches, including late work policies, which is, at least the policy part of that is being considered by the board policy committee. We have some of the particular departments both thinking about how tracking happens, how curriculum does or does not, and pedagogical approaches do or do not align with our equity values. So the math department, foreign languages, are systems of tracking for AP and honors classes and who ends up enrolling in those. Teacher diversity, which is part of the superintendent's plan for the year, student assessments, and then summer school and intervention opportunities, particularly for sort of TK through 3, reading and math intervention. Outreach to how we outreach to the community. Do we, part of the board's goal of outreaching to a greater diversity, particularly of historically marginalized groups. The social dynamics out in our recesses, out in our schools. So for some schools, that means recess, our outdoor spaces, all of the ways that students engage with each other outside class. The pathways for high school students, the CTE pathways, college readiness pathway, who's falling in those different categories, what the opportunities are for students. And then students with disabilities, which is perhaps we have at least some data coming back to us in the form of the audit. So that's the list that I have. Yeah, Trustee Davidson.
I think I just wanted to piggyback on what Trustee Boyd said, and then you just brought it up with students with disabilities or learning differences. I think that's come up kind of across all of these, and that maybe just looking at our definition in our district of our least restrictive environment and making sure that we have flexibility in our services or encourage flexibility and innovation in our services to support these learners. I feel like we've just been doing it. Well, we can save it for a meeting, but just to encourage flexibility and innovation in really having the least restrictive environment and getting support to those students.
Right. So I think the pieces for the board to take action on are, we can ask that data on some of these things be presented to us. We can ask for specific reports or workshops or just staff reports on some of these topics. We can have committees work on them. We do have a student achievement committee. Maybe we can spend a few minutes just hearing about their work plan. We can undertake to work on a policy. We can provide direction to the superintendent about things that we would like to have worked on, although he has his sort of set of actions for the current school year already. So maybe we can start with the first piece, which is getting information and data and presentations. So we will have a presentation of the special education audit. So that will be the first opportunity to have that discussion. I believe there's still a plan to have a workshop specifically on math in the district. Is that correct, Superintendent Wells?
I'm working with the high school principal now, and we're looking at the month of March, maybe the second board meeting in March.
And what do you think the scope of that presentation is going to look like?
I think given an overall operations of the math department, how they address all their kids and their current practices, and the rationale for some of their current practices, and a Q&A, and then maybe some direction from the board. Because we're bringing up math, because math seems to be one where it raises a lot of questions, ranging from kids dropping a particular math class at rates that doesn't look satisfactory, and why is that? And then what can we do to address that? We also want to look at the DNF rate in mathematics. And why math? I think math is a good subject to look at, since it's been determined that math is a gatekeeper for our major universities. And in order for our kids to be eligible for those universities, colleges, that they have to get through our rigorous math program. And so what is the percentage of kids getting through that? What do they look like? Where do they come from? And are we providing adequate supports for those kids to be successful? So we're going to grapple with those kinds of things at this workshop that we're going to have this upcoming spring, or right before spring.
So I want to, maybe this would be a good time to get a little bit more feedback, especially from the other board members that brought up math, just to make sure that that workshop really hits on what we're hoping to look at. So I guess Trustee Lyra mentioned, there seems to be a bit of a disconnect between some of the approach at the middle school and the high school, and also our math tracking does begin in 8th grade. So I think it would be important to have, in terms of data, to have really clear data, because we've gotten some data over the years, but I think not a super clear picture of who's taking which classes starting with 8th grade, so that we see who's being tracked into higher math in 8th grade, and then what that distribution of students among the different classes looks like in the subsequent years, including students who only take the minimum 2 years, which means they're not eligible they're not meeting the UC CSU eligibility. So that's the data that I can think of, but I don't know if Trustee Boyd and Trustee Lyra, you had other questions you want to make sure are sort of part of that math discussion.
Well, I think I agree with what you said, and I thought that what Dr. Wells said sounded pretty expansive. I mean, I think having data, I'm assuming that means demographic data broken down across all the various groups. I guess also so students who are taking certain classes, also students who drop particular classes. And that's the only other thing that I could think of.
I think for me, I would also want to, oh, sorry, am I interrupted? Sorry, Trustee Davidson, did you have something? Okay, thank you, sorry about that. I was just gonna say that I think also just clarity around the messaging in high school classes. I think Allison and I have anecdotes of teacher experiences saying certain things to almost even discourage me or others from proceeding with a certain level of math due to reasons that are out of our control and are out of theirs, but I don't know, clarification around the messaging, and then also why is there a disconnect between these two different site strategies, and then yeah, I don't know, like, sorry, I kind of like lost my train of thought.
Trustee Davidson.
I think that it would be helpful to have a brief overview of the math curriculum that we're using and the trainings that our staff receives around that curriculum. And then, a snapshot of that. And then if we have any information on, I don't know if this is even possible to get, but I would love to hear from our students how they feel that math curriculum is being delivered and how effective it is. And I'm just going to give, my personal history of tutoring students in this district for the last 12 years and hearing from so many of them that it just doesn't, the curriculum doesn't make sense. They don't understand it. And I don't know if that's based on the curriculum that we're using, based on our instructional practices, based on our training. And I would like to just see if we can unpack a little bit how that is impacting math in our district. And I know that we chose this curriculum, at least I think, to align with the Common Core shift in California. And so it would be helpful to look into that a little bit more. And if we had any information, and this can come later, because I think this is a bigger thing than just a presentation in March, that we look at what other districts are using for math and if we can get our hands on any of their rates, or just different ways to compare and contrast this, because I know that this is a very long running concern in our district. I mean, I can vouch for a decade of it. So I don't know. Yeah, anyways, I think that those would really be the helpful things to look at. I don't think this is just based on one teacher that we have in place right now, unless that person has been driving our math for this long in the district, which could be. But I think that we should really take a broader approach to all of it and really look at those other components.
Vice President Duran.
I had wanted to, I don't know if the superintendent wants to respond to this, or it's something to have for that math workshop time, which is when we did discuss the Ds and Fs at our board meeting, and Principal McNally spoke about providing resources, and that those resources, I mean, especially when we're talking about equity all night, and the kinds of resources that are provided for kids, but that are not being used by the most needy of those math kids. And so I'd like to know more about that. What does that mean? And how are we trying to resolve that?
So I can add as an item some data, and then we could have discussion about what kinds of services are offered and who's using them.
And President Hinckley, and just the additional, and if the kids that really need the assistance are not, for whatever reason, taking advantage of it, what are the reasons, and what can we do about it? What does the math department in particular feel needs to be done?
Okay. All right, so, oops, I lost my list. So several of the things we've brought up, I think, start with some data, for example, on AP honors, high school assessments, the CTE pathways, and some of those are part of existing committees. We have a CTE committee that I think could dig into some of this, and we have a student achievement committee. There's one item on here that doesn't clearly fall into any work that's currently being done, which is what are the sort of social, emotional, social dynamics piece. That's not part of an existing, well, we do have a wellness committee. I misspoke, but so I wanted to see if we could spend a little bit of time digging into, what are the areas where we could think of equity as applying to those sort of non-classroom interactions, and what would we want to find out? Where could we try to exert influence? We have the California Healthy Kids Survey, which we're overdue for a presentation on, because of the sort of wonky timing in which it was done in the middle of the pandemic. We can look at historical data on some of that. We can try to reach out to students. I don't know if there are other, this was sort of your item, Trustee Davidson, but I think we're all interested in this sort of whole child picture. So once we get outside the classroom, what are the areas where we could try to do some work? Vice President Duran, is that from before?
Yeah, it was, but I'll just say really quickly, I am on the Wellness Committee, and we will be discussing specific goals or what we would like to accomplish this year, because we need to get a report back to the board, my understanding by the end of the year. So we definitely will, come up with a couple of 1 or 2 items to focus on, and we will get back to the board on those.
Are there maybe for the student board members, reading that high school survey, for example, where there was a lot of interesting data, but there were a lot of comments about just the school culture, different kinds of bullying, the bathrooms are a nightmare, a lot of homophobia, a lot of transphobia, a lot of microaggressions around rape. These were the kinds of comments that people brought up. And so I think, it's hard for the board to sort of figure out what are the places where we can intervene in that, right? We can make statements, we can have spotlights, we can have recognitions, but at the end of the day, what are the places where we can sort of intervene? The district has hired different programs to do anti-bullying workshops and other things, especially for younger kids. So that's one sort of area of intervention where the board can identify whether those are working. We have things like the Challenge Day program, which we just approved again. Do you have thoughts about how we can tap into this aspect of equity, which is helping kids feel like they can succeed at school because it's not a sort of minefield for them? They feel welcome and they have nice places to play.
I mean, I'm just like speaking from the heart here, and like personally, it's been like I had a really difficult mental health day recently because of my identity. Like I was just thinking about how I just don't feel like I fit in Albany, and like I went to the mental health office for the first time last Monday because I was just feeling so like out of place. And at some like points, it's not even really like, it's just an internal thing that I think some students just build up over time. And I've been verbally harassed like around Albany, but never here, like, and in this district for my identity. But I still feel like I have had verbal altercations with students like because of racism. And it's like, yeah, I don't know. I still struggle with it to this day. And like, it's hard for me to come up with solutions because I feel like, yeah, I don't know. I don't think about it too much, but when I do think about it, it just like all comes like sort of crashing down on me. And like, it just really does a number on my mental health. So I don't know. I appreciated Challenge Day. I appreciate that we have a lot of mental health like resources and supports. I think the biggest thing that I remember from Challenge Day my sophomore year was just the fact that like everyone was talking about how they wanted some sort of follow-up, and there was an attempt to do that in my world history class. Like my teacher, she was like, okay, let's do a 2-minute check-in at the beginning of every class to like just check in on how we're doing. And she kept up with that, and then COVID hit. And I appreciated that she did that. I wish there was some more like general consensus on how to follow up after something as meaningful as Challenge Day, or even like have some sort of get together before then with the students. But yeah, I don't know. I was just like, I don't know. I guess I'm kind of just complaining and like feeling sad because there is a need for this for sure.
Yeah, thank you for sharing all that. I think that's all really valuable and helpful. And maybe maybe one starting point is just for the board to hear about the kinds of programs that do exist, like Challenge Day, and what people's experiences are, because if you haven't participated in it, I mean, I was surprised at how open people were about their experiences and their struggles. And yeah, a lot of students, I think, then felt like, okay, now what? How do we continue that conversation? So maybe one starting point is just to hear, we do have a mental health update, but I think we're talking about that as well as these spaces where just your sort of everyday space, as well as learning some about how do we train our teachers and staff to support students and to do that kind of follow up and incorporate it into the classroom. So maybe that's something else we could find out more about. Trustee Davidson.
Well, again, student board member Dana, do you have anything you want to say before I jump in?
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about, I mean, I've been thinking a lot about like what I think it was Ethan that said this in our SAC presentation. And he was talking about, I guess, just general like slurs and like remarks and stuff, and how there wasn't a lot of mitigation like from the staff and district level, or it was like hard for like intervention to happen, and I don't really know how to like solve that, but I think it would be nice just having clarification on like district wide like intervention when those sorts of things happen. I know it's not really that too related to what Trustee Lyra said, but I think that it's also important to think
I think Allison froze for a sec. Trustee Davidson, you want to?
Yeah, you brought up something really important, which was the bathrooms. And I want to go back to this again. And I think this is something that we really could work on in Albany. And it's just these like base level needs being more comfortable and provided for our students. I think being able to go to the bathroom comfortably while you're in a place that you're in all day speaks volumes. And I know this is an issue in schools for a really long time. But if there was anything we could do to get creative around some solutions for this, I think that would be a really strong move that we could make at all levels in our district. And, I also it was such an interesting experience. Last Friday, I got to volunteer and step in at Cornell and sub in their PE class. And it was so awesome to be back on one of our campuses. And I realized that kids just want to talk to an adult sometimes. They just want to have a conversation. They want to tell you something. They want to play a game with you. They just want some attention from you. And so much of our time when we're in a classroom is getting through a lesson plan and moving this forward, and then behavior management and this. And so opportunities where we can have positive interactions between students and staff. And so maybe it's that we figure out a way that, once a month, each staff member takes a turn to sit out at lunch and chat with a group of students, and, can just be very informal, but having that interaction can really help, I think, to take down some of the anxiety around those interactions and to help establish more positive connections between our students and our staff. And that's something that we've talked about a lot from that Healthy Kids survey, is seeing a lot of our students not having like good positive relationships with our staff. And so I would really love for us to look at that. And from an equity standpoint, once a staff member or a teacher or an adult can really key in with students, especially students who have a higher level of need or someone who we don't know it yet, I think we can get at those needs more. Again, I'm just going to keep going back to sort of the basic human approaches to some of these things. And once those are checked off, I think that our learning things will become much easier.
Vice President Duran.
I think after all our talk on equity, this is when it really gets down to implementation. And that's why words are only words until we do something about it. And both of the student trustees, I think, bring up the crucial issues that impact on mental health at the high school, the microtransgressions, the homophobia, all those things that kids get every day, and especially you add the pandemic to it and all the stress. I think we, as a board, we have to do something about it. We have to be proactive. We just can't say to the kids, or to the students, I'm sorry, student trustees, this is a real dire situation. We'll figure it out. I mean, we just have to be more aggressive, I believe. And I mean, because this didn't just start yesterday or last year or 2 years ago. It's been part of the culture of the high school. And until something is really done about it. And so, I just want to put it out there that this is just an example of, we can have all the beautiful words about equity, but what are we going to do about it? And the only thing I thought of was, I don't know what advisory is for at the high school, for example. I'm not quite sure what purpose it is. I thought it was supposed to be about community building, that kind of thing. And to me, that just seems the perfect place for kids to talk about what they're feeling, what's going on, and to have the trained teachers to be able to address those issues. And the more diverse the teacher population is, the more they're going to be able to address these issues, I believe. And so I think we need to start saying, okay, well, can we do this? As President Hinckley always talks about, can we get information back from the district, data? What's going on? Is it possible in an advisory to start addressing the issues that both of you have spoken about? And that, the superintendent walks into different advisories and does, talks to the kids. And we just, it just can't be words. It has to be action. And I'm not suggesting that what I'm throwing out would make a difference, but I think we have to do something.
Yeah, Trustee Dana.
I was just gonna say that I appreciate that thought, primarily, and then secondly, I think I can shed a little light on like what the advisory periods are kind of there for. I know that some student groups, such as peer help and leadership, meet during the advisory time. So this is kind of like a set time for those groups. But for the rest of the student population, it's a time where students have, I guess, the ability to work on homework. And it's just kind of a sort of set time in the day where you don't really have any class. So it's easy for you to just like get work done. But sometimes I know some teachers over the pandemic have turned to social intervention and stuff. And I would like to explore that a little bit further.
Yeah, Trustee Lyra.
Yeah, I think utilizing some point of the time period during advisory to have some sort of presentation or for a school visit to occur at some point, something along the lines of maybe an assembly. It's just, yeah, I think those are really necessary. I guess at the same time, maybe making it interactive would be really useful. I think students tend to like roll their eyes at a presentation or find it easy to tune out, but like having some sort of like facilitated discussion or like some sort of like discussion where we can get feedback from students at their like table groups about what they think the intervention needs are, what they'd like to see, or how they feel that things are being addressed at the school. I think would be really helpful. Maybe I'm sure like leadership students or peer help students would be open to hosting that, at least at the high school. And I think the middle school, they also have they have like PEAK, which is like Peers Educating Albany Kids. I think they're like a student group that also goes and teaches about wellness. It's been a while, I don't quite remember, but there is a group dedicated to like spreading some sort of like positive message at the middle school. I'm not quite sure like what the group is again, but something interactive where we can get feedback.
Great, thank you. Trustee Davidson.
Dr. Wells, is this something that we could put on the job description for this professional development director or coordinator that we created a position for? Because this seems perfect to sort of explore this, research it, and then once we get that person on for next school year, make this like task number one is to, you know, have this conversation again, maybe with this person, and then really have that person lead on some of those elements.
Let me respond to that. First of all, I think you're right on target, Trustee Davidson. Part of the Director of Professional Development will be to train and implement on the whole child side of the house, mental health responses on a 3-level approach. What are we doing intentionally for all kids around mental health? What are we doing for those kids who need additional help? And what are we doing for kids who need more intensive support? And that's articulated through a systems approach. So that would be a primary responsibility. Getting back to both our student board members, I appreciate the realness that we get from them. One, what I would want to know is, most importantly, when a student suddenly need to talk to adults, that we have adults available for them to talk to. And two, when we need to mitigate, that we have folks around who can mitigate and follow up. And so that would be the job responsibility of all of us, but the focused area and who would be responsible for leading that work would be the Director of Professional Development.
Great. Thank you for clarifying that. All right, so we're almost at time and I want to be respectful of when we were supposed to end. So I'll let Vice President Duran, obviously you can make your comment, but then I'll just sort of summarize how we're going to make sure these items don't get lost over the rest of the spring. Yeah, Vice President Duran.
I'm basically going to repeat. I think our house is burning. I think kids are feeling a lot of emotional stuff, and some of it is just not built on the pandemic, but is stuff from that's built on racism and phobias. And it's our kids that are paying the price, and we've heard it. We've seen it on the surveys from last year or 2 years ago now, and we still do not seem like we're doing anything about it, except for bringing in somebody new who's going to tackle the issue next year. And I'm saying our kids need responses from adults right now. I think it's a fire alarm that we're hearing from students. And if we don't do anything about it, that's on us as the board, for one.
Yep. So, oh, sorry. Go ahead, Trustee Boyd.
Sorry, I just put my hand up. Shoot. Wow. I guess I just don't sleep enough at night. So so I think two things. One was kind of going off of what Vice President Duran just mentioned, and something that I think we talked about in a board meeting before, perhaps that one of our student board members raised, about whether students are even aware of all of the resources that are available around, wellness and, mental well-being and all of that stuff. So I'm not sure if we, like, what the next step was on that piece, if there was any sort of formal, like, outreach that was supposed to happen, but I just want to make sure that the resources that are available are known about and being, like, utilized. I remember one person who's just a wonderful asset in our district, Will Kaysen, at the middle school, and sometimes I've had parents kind of tell me about middle school students who are struggling, and I say, oh, well, is that person seeing Mr. Kaysen, because he's wonderful? And and it's like, sometimes I feel like there's kind of a disconnect. So just making sure that when we do get these wonderful resources in place, that we're making sure that they're known about. And then also, President Hinckley, I wasn't sure if when you said you wanted to kind of talk about making sure these things don't get lost, were you planning on going through, like, this kind of topics that we said that we wanted to talk about and say, like, okay, so this committee I think could work on this or that? Is that what you were thinking of doing?
That's what I was thinking of doing. I don't know how much detail I'll go into tonight, but yeah.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah, so here's my list again, and I will share this out and make sure people, the public can see it as well. So homework and grading approaches, including late work policies, that is the policy part is in the board policy committee. I think the wellness committee could also take up particularly the issues that are, less around curriculum and more about how are we stressing students out by various approaches. The math department, we have a math workshop coming forward to us. Foreign language, we did not talk about, but I can put that into our issues bin and see. The tracking on AP and honors classes, anything related to assessments and who takes what classes and who's falling in different categories around tracking and graduation and so forth, needs to come to us, I think, first as a data report, a staff report with some data so that we can really better understand some of those gaps. But also the Student Achievement Committee, which I am not on, but I think Vice President Duran is on that committee, is reviewing some of that data as well. Teacher diversity is part of the superintendent's goals for this current year, so we'll be getting some information about that in the future. All of the social emotional stuff, I think the first two ways this comes to us are as part of the mental health report. And I know the mental health staff are focused on some of these sort of, background noise issues that affect students' mental health. How can we use things like affinity groups, like Mr. Kaysen has done, and other strategies to both talk about belonging and bullying and other things. So I think that definitely belongs in that report, and that's coming to us in February, as well as a report on the Healthy Kids Survey. The students with disabilities, we talked about, we have both the committee, but also the audit coming forward to us. We have not talked about the sort of more diverse outreach to our community at all. So that may be something that we decide to do a workshop on or a special discussion at a board meeting. We've played around the edges with this as far as trying to do better translations, trying to do different forms of outreach. But I think there's trying to interact with some of the parent engagement groups, but I think we're still, by and large, hearing a lot from the same group of 20 or 30 parents all the time out of 3,000 parents. So yeah, Trustee Boyd.
Just on that piece, I actually went to a conference where a district was talking about having parent ambassadors who were people who were specifically chosen to who are members of particular groups, like like foster families or homeless families or different cultural ethnic groups. And I got really excited at the thought of perhaps talking to folks here about that type of program. So I don't know. I know that Kim Trutane is in charge of, I believe, like communications in general. Dr. Wells, I don't know what the right step would be as far as even starting a conversation about, just talking about an initiative like that, a program like that. And, but I would be happy to just, start having a conversation to see if there's something worth, like if we could find, like have something to present to the board, to actually get to that step as a discussion.
I think it's something we need to explore in the immediate future. I wish it was one of the suggestions that was on the table, or maybe Madam Chair, Trustee Hinckley can make that one of the items that you didn't mention before, but mention now, because I've been to a number of those workshops, and those ambassadors can be very powerful in a number of different ways in helping kids and families navigate and get support. But I'm most interested in that. But I think it needs to be one of the things we put on the table as we look at all the things we want to address this year. And this year is 5 months left.
Yeah, so this is part of the list is the community outreach. So yeah, I mean, I hear obviously, yeah, we have 5 months, although I think we're sort of talking more about the calendar year. And my understanding was that Kim was also trying to convene a lot of the existing engagement groups to better sort of leverage those relationships as well. So if you're willing to, Trustee Boyd, to sort of figure out what's happening and then, you know, come back to an agenda meeting or create an agenda item that makes sense for us to hear more about that, that would be great. I think the other sort of audience group, particularly as we expand our inter-district transfer program, is that, you know, sometimes there's 40 new freshmen coming into the high school who haven't been in Albany. And some of us as parents have tried to sort of figure out how to support them, but without access to district lists, we're pretty limited. So I think that's another group that could use some, you know, an ambassador sort of program. All right, so I will type up this list and share it out so that the public can also see that list. And you all know we have an issues bin as well as the agenda calendar, so you can sort of keep track a little bit and hold me accountable for making sure things move forward. Any other last comments before we adjourn? All right, our next regular board meeting is next Tuesday, January 25th. And hopefully everyone will remain safe until then. So good night, we're adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.